At 6, Boris Johnson urges world leaders to pull out all the stops and reach a deal to tackle climate change with just 48 hours to go at COP26. The Prime Minister returned to Glasgow today. He said a deal was in sight, but negotiations were getting tough with a huge amount still left to do.
So now is the time for everyone to come together and show the determination needed to power on through the blockages.
We'll be asking if a deal will go far enough to keep global temperatures in check. Also tonight, the Conservative MP Sir Geoffrey Cox denies any wrongdoing over his second job, as the Prime Minister says if MPs break the rules, they must be punished. From tomorrow, anyone working in a care home in England must now be double vaccinated. And the woman who spent decades trying to find out what happened to her father after his ship went down in World War II in one of the UK's worst maritime disasters.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, heartbreak for England as New Zealand's incredible comeback denies them a place in the T20 World Cup final.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. The Prime Minister has called on world leaders to stop sitting on their hands and give a determined push to get a deal on limiting climate change over the line. Boris Johnson said people would find it absolutely incomprehensible if they failed to commit to serious reductions in carbon emissions. With just 48 hours left before the COP26 climate change summit in Glasgow is due to end, Boris Johnson travelled there and said a deal was in sight, but there was still a lot of work to be done. With more, here's our science editor, David Shookman.
Can the world agree to slow down the release of the gases heating the planet? Can it do what it takes to reduce the melting of the polar ice? And will this be enough to limit the rise of the sea? With the conference now entering its final days, delegates are trying to find common ground. And the UK, as host, has come up with a draft of a possible agreement. 7 pages of text, welcomed as a first step by some, but criticised by many.
The words are almost meek and mild in many places, and I think, the world is on fire. I mean, we've seen the Australian wildfires, we've seen, koalas being burnt alive. We need to make sure that we've got power and proactive commitments on the table.
Any document like this is bound to be a compromise, so it calls for the first time for coal to be phased out, the dirtiest fossil fuel, but doesn't give a date. It pushes for 1.5 degrees Celsius to be the limit of global warming, but currently no one's on course to achieve that. And it urges countries to update their climate plans, not in 2025, but far sooner, in fact next year, but there's no obligation.
Needs to be really clear, there's no room for ambiguities and fudges. I see in this latest text there's a lot of urging and calling for that kind of soft language, and it'll need to be sharpened up. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to claim that this summit has succeeded.
So the Prime Minister has stepped in, briefly, but faced with an uphill struggle, he's now trying to manage expectations.
The COP26 summit here in Glasgow is not going to fix it in one go. We're not going to arrest climate change right here, right now. That is just impossible. And I think everybody has got to be realistic about that. But there is the possibility that we will come away from this with the first genuine roadmap for a solution to anthropogenic climate change.
And to try to keep a sense of momentum, there's a government initiative on electric cars for a global deadline to phase out petrol and diesel engines by 2040 at the latest. But some of the most important countries have not signed up.
On any objective analysis, this doesn't go far enough, quick enough, in order to get us to net zero by 2050. So progress, but lots of gaps.
In this last phase of the talks, different perspectives are colliding. Industrial giants like China that don't want to see their businesses restrained, and others like Madagascar, victims of climate change and desperate for this conference to get them help.
And David, time is running out. The question is a deal going to be tough enough?
It all depends on the kind of diplomatic trench warfare that's underway behind the scenes, haggling line by line over the agreement. I mean, will the big coal-producing countries, China and India, accept the idea of phasing out coal? Will the poorest nations, most desperate for help, demand a much clearer statement about the aid that they've been promised that still hasn't been delivered? I think ultimately, will enough be done to even attempt to bridge the gap between what the science requires in terms of avoiding the worst risks of global warming in the future, which is to cut global carbon emissions by half by 2030, as opposed to the reality that the latest projections show those emissions are set to rise by something like 14% over that period. I think what we're likely to get at the end of the day, if all goes well, unless there's some major surprise breakthrough, is groups of like-minded countries choosing to act faster than others, but at least the world remaining engaged and agreeing to keep talking.
David Shookman in Glasgow, thank you. The Prime Minister says MPs who break the rules must be punished, but he defended the system of politicians having second jobs, saying he did not believe that the UK was a corrupt country. It comes after the Conservative MP Sir Geoffrey Cox said he hasn't breached the rules governing MPs' behaviour after he was filmed apparently using his MP's office to carry out paid work advising the government of the British Virgin Islands. Our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, reports.
Not always pretty from the outside, nor perhaps on the inside either. Here's a former cabinet minister working as a lawyer from what seems to be his Commons office.
Forgive my absence during some of the morning, I'm afraid.
Yes, thank you very much.
The bell went off, he says. In other words, he had to leave this lucrative session to go and vote. And here he was again, working in the Caribbean while travel restrictions were tight.
There are real drawbacks to open registers. It becomes a political tool.
Pondering that while declaring outside work was the right thing, it could cause some problems. MPs are allowed to do other jobs. But Sir Geoffrey, the booming Brexiteer, has been the top outside earner in the Commons, and using premises funded by the taxpayer for other work is not allowed. After a couple of days of silence, a statement appeared on Sir Geoffrey's website saying he's a leading barrister in England and makes no secret of his professional activities. He always ensures his casework on behalf of his constituents is given primary importance and fully carried out, but that Sir Geoffrey will cooperate fully with an investigation into what happened, even though he does not believe that he breached the rules.
Prime Minister, are you running away from the sleaze allegations?
Boris Johnson might have boarded an early train to Glasgow, but 400 miles didn't give him much political distance.
Should MPs have second jobs, Prime Minister?
There are plenty in his own party, as well as the odd person greeting him in Glasgow, deeply unimpressed. But pressed for answers at the climate conference, he wouldn't say sorry for how he's handled MPs with second jobs.
Anybody who breaks the rules should be punished and should face the appropriate sanction. I genuinely believe that the UK is not remotely a corrupt country, nor do I believe that our institutions are corrupt.
Labour won't let up because it thinks the Prime Minister's vulnerable. Although, as an MP, before he became leader, Keir Starmer earned more than £100,000 part-time doing legal work.
This is going back several years. I actually gave up my certificate to practice law the best part of 2 years ago. I'm not particularly bothered by what the Mail or others are trying to rake up. But I would just say this, that anything I've done since I've been in Parliament has been in accordance with the rules and properly declared.
There are many different strands and claims of sleaze, that toxic mixture of money and politics that creates such suspicion. Is the behaviour of a few dozen, mainly Conservative MPs, that's being called into question. But the whole of this place and the Prime Minister's judgment have been mired in the mess.
The Prime Minister must know all's not well. feeling the need to say to the world that our parliament, our politics are not corrupt. But allegations day after day do lap at the edges. Faith, if lost, is hard to restore. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
From midnight tonight, it will be compulsory for anyone working in a care home in England to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 unless they're medically exempt. Care home managers who are already struggling to fill vacancies fear it could mean they'll lose up to 8% of their staff. The Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, says the new rule was announced several months ago and will make care homes safer. Our social affairs editor, Sir Alison Holt, has more.
The end of a breakfast shift for Daniela Bell and the end of a job that she loved. She's worked in a care home with older people with dementia for nearly 4 years, but because she won't have the COVID jab, she had to leave before tonight's deadline. She's worried about vaccine side effects and says she already has high antibody levels from having the virus.
It was difficult this morning. It was a bit heartbreaking. But yeah, I had to, because I love what I do and I love the people, I love the staff. And it's been hard to break from that because that's what I can't see myself do something else.
And the number of staff leaving remains a real worry, according to the National Care Forum, which represents services employing 14,000 people, looking after 11,000 residents. In a snapshot survey, its members believe they will have lost 3.5% of their workers by midnight tonight. And another group will leave when they can no longer self-certify that they have a medical exemption. In these services alone, that adds up to more than 1,000 staff going.
Care homes feel that they've been guinea pigs in terms of the implementation of this policy. It means that the workforce that we need to be able to take in new people who require care, particularly whether they're coming from hospitals or from the communities, are just not there.
Oh yeah, you've got another edge there.
At this Croydon nursing home, they expect to lose 3 staff before Christmas when self-certified medical exemptions end.
I think I had done it.
Here, like many places in the care sector, they struggle to find nurses.
There just aren't the nurses out there, or the nurses that want to come and work in care homes. We've interviewed several nurses, and when we've asked them the question, are they vaccinated? They've said no, they don't want to be vaccinated.
Just because of the way the immune system works.
But information sessions run with their local council and NHS have persuaded most of their staff to have jabs. Some had been put off by what they read on social media.
I think the information is the key. I think that people shouldn't just busy themselves of what happened in social media, because 90% of what they write there or what they say there is lies.
What did you think when you had it? Were you nervous?
Well, when I was going there, I was a bit worried. But when I went there, they talked to me about the vaccine. So I had it and there was nothing.
And despite existing staff shortages in the care sector, council bosses believe homes will cope with support.
Many of them have been recruiting, of course, to replace staff that they've known will be leaving. So can't rule out there won't be a problem in a small number of places. But overall, this has been well managed and the sector will come through it.
But whether homes will be able to find enough new staff to replace those who are going is still uncertain. Alison Holt, BBC News.
Well, the government's latest coronavirus figures for the UK show there were almost 40,000 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means on average there were 33,866 new cases reported per day in the past week. 214 deaths were recorded. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive test. On average, in the past week, 165 related deaths were recorded every day, and more than 10.9 million people have now had their booster jab. Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel has told President Putin of Russia that he must stop what she called the inhumane exploitation of the migrant crisis at the border between Poland and Belarus. Thousands of people have massed in the area, wanting to cross into Poland and enter the EU. Poland's Prime Minister has accused Belarus of state terrorism over the crisis. Nick Beek sent this report from the border.
For those who'd hoped to find a new life, safe in the European Union, there's a grim realisation this could now be home, trapped between Belarus and Poland. The BBC was sent these pictures as journalists and crucially aid agencies are being kept away.
It's very, very bad.
We managed to contact Ilyas, who was a scientist in Iraq. He wants EU member Poland to let them through.
My message is I want to open the border European Poland.
Why should Poland open the border to you?
1 day, 2 days, 3 days. After I died.
You fear that people will die?
Yes.
Poland has been accused of pushing back migrants illegally. But it wants to highlight this: Belarusian troops appearing to force migrants along the border, and has accused Belarus of terrorism masterminded by Russia. The European Union says this is a man-made political crisis.
This is a challenge to the whole of the European Union, and this is not a migration crisis. This is the attempt of an authoritarian regime to try to destabilize its democratic neighbors.
But Russia has hit back, saying the EU was provoking Belarus. Moscow released footage of 2 bombers being sent to patrol its allies' airspace in a demonstration of solidarity, as well as a show of strength, amid a growing international crisis.
This huge forest, called Białowieża, is one of Europe's oldest woodlands, but it's now the epicenter of the continent's newest migrant crisis. Thousands have been trying to make their way from Belarus through these trees to here in Poland, and many more are set to follow, determined to take their chances in this wilderness if it means reaching EU soil.
Because in Belarus's capital Minsk, more families were preparing to head to the border after being welcomed by President Lukashenko's regime. They're apparently undeterred by the spiralling misery that awaits them. Nick Beak, BBC News, on the Poland-Belarus border.
The time is just after 6:15, our top story this evening. Boris Johnson returns to Glasgow to urge world leaders to pull out all the stops and reach a deal to tackle climate change with just 48 hours to go. And still to come, England miss out as New Zealand reach the final of the T20 World Cup.
Coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News Channel, sports impact on climate change. Formula E features at COP26, and we'll hear from one of its former champions on racing for a better, cleaner future.
Droughts across Africa has increased sharply in the past decade. Research by the World Bank says sub-Saharan Africa has contributed the least to global warming, yet the continent will experience the most devastating impacts of climate change. Parts of South Africa are already experiencing a 7-year dry period. But the city of Cape Town, which came close to running out of water completely 3 years ago, is finding unusual ways to cope. Our Africa correspondent Andrew Harding reports on South Africa's own climate battle.
High in the mountains around Cape Town, a bold and frantic fight to save rainwater. Teams here are scaling the wilderness to remove alien trees, armies of foreign invaders like the pine. That's because pine trees are thirsty, sucking up a quarter of the water that might otherwise end up in Cape Town's reservoirs. Every stump here means more water for humans. And these days, Africa's big, growing cities need every raindrop. Girls in a makeshift settlement near Cape Town gather at a communal tap. Drought, the calling card of climate change, has become part of their childhood.
It's not something that will happen in the future, it's something that is happening right now. So it makes me worried, frustrated. It makes me want to take stand and bring up change.
It's 3 years now since Cape Town came terrifyingly close to running out of water completely. We were here then to report on the world's first big, modern city to face that threat. Back then, a devastating drought turned the city's reservoirs into dust bowls. The good news is that it shocked the authorities and the public into taking drastic action to slash their water usage.
The thought of running out of water as a city was quite tragic and very scary. So, and the city did quite well in preaching the message of saving water, and we halved our water use.
But Cape Town's successes are the exception here in South Africa. Not far from the city, the worst drought in more than a century is in full fury. Man-made climate change blamed for these scenes in the Eastern Cape. In desperation, wild animals are coming to farms in search of food. But it's been 7 years with almost no rainfall. Farmers here now trudge across their bone-dry pasture land and wonder if the game is up.
Sometimes I don't want to think about the future. If you see our animals now, I'm not thinking about tomorrow. I'm just struggling and see how can I survive today.
And in the towns and even cities here, the mood is not much cheerier. Frantic scenes when a charity brings a water truck to a settlement where the taps have been dry for months. But there is more to this than drought.
It is easy and very tempting to blame the drought for the desperate conditions facing these families. But the truth is that this is about a failure of planning, of maintaining the infrastructure here. It's about a lack of investment.
Across this region, some 40% of water reserves are being lost to leaking pipes. That's down to mismanagement and corruption.
I'm worried about the future.
Why do you think it's going to get worse?
Because they don't look after us.
The government?
Yeah, they don't look after us.
This is now a continent's challenge, to manage water better and to manage it more fairly. Because the droughts are queuing up, ominously, and there is no time to spare. Andrew Harding, BBC News, South Africa.
A woman has been arrested following a dog attack in which a 10-year-old boy died. The 28-year-old from Kafili was questioned on suspicion of being in charge of a dog dangerously out of control, causing injury resulting in death. She was released on bail. Marks & Spencer reported a surge in half-year profits as its food division helped it bounce back after COVID restrictions. Pre-tax profits for the 6 months to October were £187 million, up by almost 18% on the period 2 years ago before the pandemic. A man who was stranded underground for more than 2 days in the Brecon Beacons has been named as 38-year-old George Linnane from Bristol. The engineer, who's an experienced caver, fell on Saturday. 300 volunteers came together to bring him to safety. He's being treated for a broken leg, a broken jaw and chest injuries at a hospital in Cardiff. It's Armistice Day tomorrow, when the nation remembers those who have lost their lives in conflict. But the families of almost 400 men who died in World War II in one of the worst maritime disasters in UK waters are also still searching for answers. In 1943, the aircraft carrier HMS Dasha exploded and sank off the Ayrshire coast. Relatives believe some of the dead were washed ashore and buried in an unmarked mass grave. Hugh Pym has been talking to one woman who spent decades searching for the truth.
I want to honour him and I want to honour the others.
It's been a long journey for Mary, but it's not over. She's determined to find out what happened to her father and other men who were lost at sea in World War II, not far from this beach in North Ayrshire. She thinks the truth has been withheld.
The thought of my father, of other men being totally forgotten, being deliberately hidden, is so wicked that I just must put it right.
HMS Dasha, an aircraft carrier, sank in minutes in the Firth of Clyde after an explosion on board, thought to have been caused by a petrol leak. Mary's father, George, was one of 379 men who died out of a total of more than 500 on board.
I remember the telegram coming, and my mother opened it and screamed.
Barry, who's 96, remembers the day Dasha went down.
Well, I was walking back from the bus, and the next time I looked back, there was just the flames, smoke, because everyone seemed to have been told, no, don't talk about it. And even the survivors.
There are just 23 known graves of those who perished on HMS Dasha and whose bodies were washed ashore, including some here in our Drossen cemetery. But it remains a mystery what happened to others.
Look at that.
2 local residents, John and Noreen Steele, have spent the last few decades trying to find out. They've interviewed survivors and eyewitnesses who said there were more bodies than officially recorded.
The survivors told us they were taken down to the mortuary to try and recognise them. They said there's about 50 bodies laid out for them.
What do you think happened to them?
They're in a pit somewhere. In a pit. Just dumped.
A Royal Navy spokesperson said the creation of a mass unmarked grave would have gone against official policy on the burial of wartime casualties. It's been suggested that for morale reasons, news of the sinking was suppressed and wasn't confirmed until 1945. Documents released in recent years here at the National Archives at Kew shed some light on the loss of HMS Dasha. Officials did not want to reveal details to relatives. The papers refer to bodies being washed ashore more than a week after the loss of the ship. A former head of the Royal Navy thinks the whole truth has yet to come out.
That a large ship like that, with a very large ship's company, should sink in enclosed waters, relatively enclosed, close to land, that there should be so few bodies that were actually buried together. I have real concerns that we haven't seen the full truth about what happened to those bodies.
For Mary, the search for answers continues. She hopes to one day find out where her father's final resting place is. Hugh Pym, BBC News, North Ayrshire.
The former sports commentator Gerald Sinstadt has died at the age of 91.
Good evening and welcome to the weekend after the night before.
His work for the BBC and ITV made him one of football broadcasting's most recognisable voices in the 1970s, 80s and 90s. He covered 4 World Cups for ITV and later worked on the Olympic Games for the BBC. Cricket now, and England are out of the 2020 World Cup. They were beaten by New Zealand in a thrilling semi-final in Abu Dhabi. New Zealand will now play either Pakistan or Australia in the final. Our sports correspondent Joe Wilson was watching.
3,000 miles from Yorkshire, this England team knows what's at stake. That crisis in cricket culture is discussed, says the captain. Whatever county they came through, his players, he says, share their experiences. He stands by the diversity and unity of this side. Against New Zealand then, deeply respected opponents. A well-placed contribution to England's innings from David Malan. All building to a big finish. Well, to an extent. This from Moeen Ali, who scored 51, helped England to a total of 166. The author of this sign had seen enough. England will win. It was only half-time. New Zealand started slow, but accelerated. This time Devon Conway missed, stumped. In football terms, an own goal. Steve Bruce enjoyed it. More fun when you're not the manager. Try being the bowler. Suddenly England couldn't cope as Jimmy Neesham took over. Sixes everywhere. Sustained by Daryl Mitchell. Everything changed. Remember a final settled in the last millisecond? This game ended with an over to spare. And this World Cup will not be England's. Joe Wilson, BBC News.
Time now for a look at the weather with Nick Miller. Hello.
Hi there. Wales and England with the cloud and the drizzle today. So I found some sunshine from southern Scotland. Actually, though, it's where you may have seen some sunshine today. You've got a chilly night to come. There may even be a touch of frost going into the morning. The satellite picture has all the clues here. So breaks in the cloud for this part of the UK where we'll see the lower temperatures tonight. Where you keep the cloud and the drizzle across a large part of Wales and England. It'll be misty, there'll be areas of fog and poor visibility. Here temperatures are going to hold up.
the area of rain that will move across northern Scotland as the night goes on, and these are your temperatures. So again, southern Scotland, maybe northernmost counties of northern England, into Northern Ireland a few spots, and then behind this area of rain in the far north of Scotland. This is where we'll have the lowest temperatures tonight, but then again you're waking up to 10 degrees in Cardiff in the morning. It's cloudy, there may be some light rain and drizzle around, and some mist, and again some areas of fog and poor visibility. Not a huge amount changes here, but there will, I think, through central and eastern parts of England be a hint of something brighter into the afternoon. But you'll notice too some outbreaks of rain for parts of Wales, northwest England, Northern Ireland, and pushing on to southwest and western parts of Scotland on through the day. We have another weather system moving in from the Atlantic. That will strengthen the wind across western coast in particular, getting some gusts approaching 40 miles an hour later in the day. But you'll notice again it's on the mild side. Today temperatures have taken a step back in Scotland and Northern Ireland. They'll be on the way up again. You can see 14 degrees in Belfast. And the rain will push across more of Scotland tomorrow evening. We'll see another area of rain reaching into Northern Ireland. So what's going on? It's all down to an area of low pressure. Another one moving in from the Atlantic that will move across much of the UK during Friday. With that, the winds will pick up, and particularly across parts of Wales and England on Friday. And there'll be some rain around, tending to go through in bands. A lot of cloud, as you can see. Could well be some heavier bursts across parts of Scotland, especially southern Scotland, and into northern England, but perhaps not too much rain at all into the far north of Scotland. And here there could be a few sunny spells around. The weather system clears away into the weekend. High pressure builds in behind. I'll show you the weekend outlook. Rein in your expectations. We've got a bit crazy with the cloud symbols, as you can see. Look, it's mainly dry. It's mild. There are light winds. Oh yes, and it's cloudy. So.
Nick, thank you. A reminder now of our main story this evening. Boris Johnson returns to Glasgow to urge world leaders to pull out all the stops and reach a deal to tackle climate change, with just 48 hours to go.
So now is the time for everyone to come together and show the determination needed to power on through the blockages.
That's all from the BBC News at 6. It's goodbye from me on BBC One. We join the BBC's news teams where you are. Goodbye.